as we said yesterday, from the Rambam, an amazing quote from the Rambam on that halacha, that it says that if a person goes to Golut, the rabbi has responsibility to go to Golut with him, because the Torah says v'chai. The Torah says you have to go ahead and make that he should live. In the same way you understand that you have to do certain things in a physical way that he should be able to live, whether it's having markets to be able to buy food and be able to have water supply. So too, included in living, when the Torah says v'chai, living without having Torah, not having the rabbi, is like not living. That's a very powerful statement. No, Mr. Safdie. Now we read the language of the Rambam. Let's see if we'll find the language over here. It's the whole city of Levium. There's Minyanim, there's Shachrit, there's Mincha, there's Ma'ariv, and there's Na'arim Miklat. It's a city of Levium. The Levium live there. But the Na'arim Miklat is part of the city of where the Levium are. So the Na'arim Miklat, the Na'arim Miklat were cities that were designated, and that part of and these cities were places where the Levium stayed. Levium lived. So the Gol Adam has the ability to walk into that city, but he can't touch him. So therefore, because the Gol Adam has the ability to walk into the city, so we do certain things that we do not want to give the Gol Adam opportunity. We don't want him to spend too much time in the city. We don't want him to have to visit the city on a regular basis. That's what the Gemara says. We do not, certain activities we even refrain from doing in these cities that might, there's a whole discussion. Could you sell weapons in the city? You have a machluket. We had the idea of spreading nets. Spreading nets, it was a thing that made many people would come to these wide areas and spread nets for capturing purposes. And we say you can't spread nets because that will call the Gol Adam to the town. And we don't net stuff, capturing it. They would spread the nets to capture animals or other things. And certain activities that would cause population, a large amount of people, to attract people to come, we do not do certain activities in the Arim Miklat that will call attention for the Gol Adam to want to come into the city for some other purpose. That's why we don't even allow the city to be a very major city. Because a major city attracts people. And therefore the Gol Adam would come to the city on a regular basis. And if he comes to the city on a regular basis, then he might plan to kill the guy. So if he comes once in a while, so it's not something that he's, when a person most jobs, when a person attacks somebody, he knows the area, he's familiar with the area, he frequents the area, and like most inside jobs in a bank or something like that, it's an inside job. They know the ins and outs. They're frequent. They come there, and then they find the right time, the right opportunity. So we don't want him to come on a regular basis. We don't want him to get comfortable in town. So that's like you said, it is open territory. It's not gated. It's not armed. The city's an open city, but therefore we don't even sell weapons, according to one opinion in the city, because the Gol Adam might come in without a weapon and he'll buy a weapon within the city. So therefore, these are some of the things that we do. So we quoted that the pasuk says v'chai, v'choy. You need to do something, do things that will help him live as a result of that. In the same way, you need to worry and be concerned for his physical living. So too, you need to make sure that he should have a spiritual living, because that's called living, and that's a bigger, higher level living. In the language of the Rambam, I'm going to read to you the language of the Rambam in Hilchos Rotzeach, Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph. The Rambam says, Kalmit, the Sefer is the Sefer of Nezikin. In the Rambam Sefer Nezikin, He writes the following: Talmud Shagala. The reason why it's in the Zikin, because the Zikin is damages, so therefore it's over there. The Talmud Shagala, a Talmud that went to exile, student that went to exile, he went to Arim Miklat, Megalin Rabu Imo. The Rebbe goes also to the exile. Shenema, V'choy. The pasuk says, "V'choy asay lo." You need to provide, do for him, k'dei sheyichya, in order that he shall live. Right now, v'chayei b'alei chachma, the life of a person of chachma, of wisdom, u'mevaksheha, and the life of someone who seeks wisdom, below Talmud, without Torah study, kimita chashuvim. It's like death. You know, some people appreciate Torah, and that's what he says. People who are balei chachma, who feels this way? Who has this attitude? Person who's a bal chachma. He's someone who is wise, someone who's learned, or someone he's looking to learn, he's looking to grow. That person understands that not everyone understands. That person understands that living, that without Torah is like death. And the Muki Yosef says, Torah is life. You know, it says, it's Chaim but he brings a different pasuk. It says, Ki chayecha v'orechimecha. It is your life. Torah is your life. You know what do we say in Arvid? Ki heim chayenu v'orechimenu. That's what we need to look at, and that's what we need to provide the needs. So therefore, when a person comes to a town, they move to a town they want to live, they move to a community they want to live. Real living is not just living physically, real living is spiritually. Therefore, they got to make sure that they set themselves up for a true living. Okay. But right, so Torah is part of life. It's just like right. Safety saying a person's a Pavlach Chesed, but there's a part of life that he needs to have is a study of Torah. That is part of life. That's living. Person who's not studying Torah is missing in life. It's missing in living. How do you like that? It's missing in living, and that's what we need to provide for the guy who went to exile. This living. This is called living quarters. Living opportunity. Okay. So it's a fascinating concept that people should realize that, and what's sad is that a lot of people don't even realize that they're not really living, that they're missing out in life. People who are not studying Torah are missing out in living. How do you like that, Mr. Safdie? Fascinating Gemara. But you need to show them. People need to know that people don't realize that they're missing. That's the problem. They don't realize that they're not living properly. Tana, Gemara continues about 6 lines into the wide lines. The Gemara continues. Amar Rav Zira. Rav Zira says, we can, based on this law, that the rabbi will have to go into exile as a result of his student, and he has to be there to teach a student. Mikan sheyishana adam l'talmid she'ein hagu. You shouldn't teach a student that's not a proper student. What does that mean? Someone has a student that's not a good boy, and he's a rasha. It would seem he's willingly doing things that are very inappropriate. He's intentionally defying the word of Hashem. He says the person should be not to teach such a student. Why shouldn't you teach such a student? Because if you teach such a student, there's a good chance that he might go ahead and and kill someone unintentionally. And if you kill someone unintentionally, as a result of that, you, the rabbi, is going to have to go and move into galut, move into exile. And therefore, to prevent yourself, to put yourself in a position that you wouldn't have to be stuck to move into exile, you have, it would seem, the language of the Gemara, which we needs further research. It sounds as if the rabbi has to uproot he has to move there. That's what it sounds like from the Gemara, and I think you would understand that. I think some explain this means when you have a rabbi who has one student, right? Sometimes the rabbi would have a personal student. And if you're a rabbi with the whole group of people, so then maybe you wouldn't go into exile at the expense of the other student, right? Because if you're teaching 10 students and one student goes to exile, you're not going to have to leave your 10 students. Logic will not, okay, we'll see about that in a moment. Logic would dictate you wouldn't have to leave your 10 students to go into cell to teach one student, because then the other 10 students are losing out on life. But let's say you're the rabbi, you're just a personal rabbi for this person. Some people have a personal rabbi, and the rabbi doesn't teach anybody else. This is his student. And that would be the rabbi which have to go into exile. In order to protect that rabbi, that he shouldn't be stuck to move into, they got to go to exile, be careful who you teach to. Now, you have to ask the question, Torah has the power to bring a guy back, and so on and so forth. That's something that we know. Torah, if a person learns Torah, they could be a very wicked person, but as a result of them learning Torah, they could change very easily. So unless it sounds like maybe I wonder if there's a difference between someone who, maybe the guy who is a Russia, who's intentionally violating the Torah, and he's not interested in, and he's learning, but maybe he's not interested in it. Maybe that's the type of Talmud that maybe you should be careful from. You have to understand this thing, because maybe you'll change the guy as a result of you teaching him Torah. Rashi says, what does Rashi say? Look at the Rashi in the left corner. There's no Tosos on the page, top left corner. The Talmud Sheina Hagun, Rashi says, Shelo yiviu avonotav l'dei hariga b'shogeg v'yiglet. That the sins of the student should not bring him, the student, to murdering unintentionally and going to exile. But the question is, if the student is a bad boy, what does it have to do with murdering unintentionally, which is an unintentional thing? It's something he didn't plan to do. We say later on that it's not common that murder is done unintentionally, only by Risha'im, through wicked people. There's a concept, good things happen through good people, and bad things happen through bad people. So if a person is a Rasha, if a person is a wicked person, so as a result of that, that could be, right, Dr. Navid? Bad things happen through bad people. So that, I presume, would be let's just see in the commentary on this Rashi. We are on 10a. Now, so I want to say a different point. I want to say a different approach. That we know that to go to exile, we said the Rambam says that part of the case of going to exile is the middle of the road case. When there is a mixat, when there's a little bit of negligence, right? We said it's not a case when the guy is a total accident. Going to exile, there was a little bit of negligence that was done by the guy. So perhaps that is the reason why this guy is more. If a guy is a rasha, a guy who does sin intentionally, he's the type of guy that will go ahead. That murder will happen, unintentional murder will happen to him, because since he's unsensitive as a rasha, he will have some level of negligence that he will act with in life. And he, therefore, if he's a rasha, he doesn't even care so much about his own life. because he's a wicked man. What do you say to that, Mr. Safdie? And therefore, it's more probable that he'll have that unintentional murder because he's not because he acts carelessly a certain amount, because we see his own actions. He acts carelessly. If he willingly violates the Torah, so then unintentionally he'll have some level of negligence, as we said, and maybe that's when more accidents would happen. I want to see if anybody picks up on this. You see, what's bothering me a little bit is that the Gemara is saying that don't teach. The person should not teach a Talmud, a student that's no good, that's up to bad things, because maybe that student will kill unintentionally. Then you're gonna have to be uprooted and moved to the exile. But my concern is, what about that Talmud? How are we going to get that student back? How are we going to get that student back if isn't the way by teaching him the Torah? Isn't that the way to get him back? What do you say, Dr. Navid? I mean, right, yeah, that right. So it doesn't. So how do we understand that? I understand, but the question is, we have to understand what the kid need help. The student needs, the Russia needs help. So is the point that the Rebbe says to the Rasha, listen, I'm willing to teach you Torah as long as you're willing to change. If you're willing to change to be differently, I'm happy to teach you Torah. Then I'm not worried about the accident happening through you. But as long as you intentionally have no interest in doing the right thing, you're a type of guy. He wants to mechal Shabbat, and he's the type of guy, he wants to do all these sins, and then he says, "Rabbi, teach me Torah." So, according to this, the rabbi could say to him, "Listen, I'm happy to teach you Torah, but you just have to say you're going to act differently. If you want to continuously act with defiance against the Torah, I am putting myself at risk of going to jail, that's going to exile with you." Is that the pshat in the Gemara? That's what we are. Maybe we'll look at the Rambam. Maybe we'll look at a Rambam quotes this Gemara. A Talmid she'eino hagun. The Hey in Hilchos Talmud Torah. Let's see if they quote the Rambam here in the back. We have in the back of this Gemara, they have a Liba de Hilchos, pointed to the halacha. But as long as the person wants, you just have to want. You just want to learn. You want to learn. Just wanting to learn. If a person is a rush, wanting to learn, I want to learn, I want to grow. That's it. You want to learn, you want to grow, the Torah will change you. But maybe if a person is learning and he has no interest, he's not interested in taking it to heart. Let's see if they quote the Rambam. The Rambam says, like this: you don't teach Torah, Nun Aleph. You don't teach Torah only to a proper student, Dr. Navid. He's proper in his actions, or a simpleton, someone who's just a simple guy. But if he goes in a not in a good way, you go ahead and you you get it. Your job is, you have a job to get him to get better, right? You have to tell him, change, right, Dr. Mr. Safdie, tell him to change. And and you go ahead and you show him, you show that student the proper way in life. And then he says, you check him, just to know what he means, you check him, and then you bring him to Beit Midrash and you teach him. But if you anybody who teaches a student that's not a proper student, that's a bad thing. So we have to understand, you have to rebuke him. You have to try to get him to change, to live a different life. But if the guy, so it still needs more clarity. At which point do we say this Talmud that's not Hagun, not a proper student, you know what it sounds like? If after you rebuked him and after you tried with the guy, that's what it sounds like. If a guy is doing good, that's the guy you teach Torah to, the guy who's doing great. He wants to learn, he wants to grow. But the guy who's doing not good in life, what do? Your responsibility is bring him back. Bring him back. And sounds like from the Rambam, you talk to him, you try to give him a right way to go, and then you see if you're on a good path, you're getting somewhere, you're making some progress. You're making some progress, and bring him into the Beit Midrash. Check them out. You get an analysis, bring him into the Midrash. But if the guy is not that type of guy, he's not doing anything right, he's not interested in moving forward, he's not interested in growing at all, he's just anti-religion. You tried with him, it's anti-religion, maybe that's the guy that that there's no, but you shouldn't, you be careful, because you could, our Gemara talks about you might go into Galut, exile, as a result of that. I mean, the language of the rabbis he quotes is like when you're throwing a stone to the Makkos. Makkos do with, we have to see more about that. Okay. Right, the Baalei Teshuva movement is that we have a mitzvah, that's the mitzvah of Tochacha. We have a mitzvah to bring everybody back. We're responsible, we're responsible for the fellow Jew. And therefore we have a mitzvah to Tocher Amisecha.
What's interesting about this is the civil refugees of all the pious people. And now I'm going to say that if you have a Russia, you might start growing to
But that means it would sound like, let's say you're living in this part of Israel.
Okay.
You're gonna have to move to the Levium. You, the rabbi, what about your kids, your wife, your kids? Oh, very good. Dr. David, your family is over here. You live 25. Your family is 25 miles away. You have your brothers there, your sister there, your parents are there. You're in Yisrael. You're living in Bnei Brak, and now you gotta move. And you have maybe your source of income, maybe, and you're not. Also, if you're not a Levi, the Levium have a source of income. So now where's your source of income from your part? Wherever you are, you're the rabbi and you have your own business wherever you are in Bnei Brak. It's interesting. The language of the Gemara is Megalin. You have to go to exile with him. That means technically, if the exile is 20 miles away, what am I going to do? I'm going to travel every day 20 miles. It's not practical. It would seem as if the rabbi has to move into that town, and he's going to have to go with his wife, his kids, and leave his family for this Talmud. It's an amazing responsibility of the rabbi, because you're responsible to bring life to this guy, and by bringing the rabbi and teaching him Torah, you bring him life. So there's a very famous question: why does the rabbi who lives in Bnei Brak have to go to exile with a student Dr. Navid just said there's full of rabbis. There's so many rabbis, so many Leviim in the town to let them teach him Torah in that town. Why does the rabbi from Bnei Brak, his rabbi from Bnei Brak, have to move in to go to exile when the guy has his own? There's many rabbis in town, a dime a dozen, as they say. The rabbis have a responsibility to teach Torah. There's a mitzvah, the language of the Chinuch or the Rambam, mitzvah al kol chacham miyisrael. The mitzvah on every chacham to teach Torah. The rabbi has a mitzvah to teach Torah. A rabbi can't say, you know what what it's like, everybody. Sometimes if it's a doctor at a scene, there's someone who's not well. They might say, if you're a doctor at a scene, you might have certain responsibilities. As a doctor, maybe. I don't know what today's law is. You know what I'm saying, Dr. Nivitz? So you as a rabbi have responsibility to teach Torah. That's your responsibility. Oh, very good. See what Mr. Safdie says. There's a concept, a person only learns from who he wants to learn from. And therefore, you could have 1,000 rabbis, thousands of rabbis in this town. But if this guy is comfortable and feels comfortable and appreciates, has that relationship with this rabbi, he might not be comfortable learning with another rabbi. No, that's the law. He is obligated. The rabbi is obligated to go to exile.
What the rabbi, is it time, is it statement, is it what the place?
It seems from our Gemara that the definition here, what we're talking about, to make a rabbi, you're the one who teaches him Torah. You teach him Torah. Now, how much Torah do you teach him? So there's different level of rabbis. Sometimes as a rabbi, you learn the most Torah from. It's called a rabbi muhak. But let's say this is the guy that he's learning with on a regular basis. He's bringing him Torah. He's teaching him knowledge. And this is his rabbi. He's spending really a person has an obligation to learn Torah every day and every night. So, right. So I would think, and I think I remember someone quoting that there it would be different, because there you wouldn't say that everyone else should lose out. Because the fact that this guy, you got to bring life to one guy, but you got to bring life to 10 people. Huh? This is more like like a personal rabbi. Like my father, alav shalom, after a hard day's work, he had a rabbi. He went to the house to learn with a rabbi. But that rabbi happened to be that maybe during the day the rabbi taught in the yeshiva, but he was one student coming over to the house. The rabbi's focused on this one student, my father, after a hard day's work. He gave him a shmata, like a little thing, with a wet put over his face, with a tea, and let's get to work. Let's get to learn. How do you like that, Dr. Navid? That was Baruch Hashem. That rabbi passed away before I met him, but that was the story. So let's see if they talk about this point that you just mentioned. Let's see. Yes, that one. Right. So if I see, that's the commentary over here of the Ion Yaakov. He says like this. First, the Ritva. Ritva is one of the great Rishonim say that even though there's yeshivot in Ari Miklat, but not from every person. Every person is a person zocheh l'ilmod Torah. Some people learn Torah from this person and not from someone else. And I would say that because you have that appreciation from that person. Now, this is only talking when the rabbi does not have other students. Only this guy who killed, this is a quote of the Ion Yaakov. Ion Yaakov, only this person who killed unintentionally. Therefore, it says, Megalin Rabbo Imo. It's his rabbi. He's specifically a rabbi for this individual, Megal Rabo. But if he has many students, we don't hold away good things from the other students because of one sinner. One person sinned, we're not going to say all the other students are going to have to lose out. That's that's a very good point. That I would think that the concept, meaning even though the law of going to exile doesn't apply today, there's no Ori Miklat today, but the concept of bringing life to the person should apply today as well. That a rabbi should feel a responsibility that if a student is in jail, to bring Torah to the student, to go to the jail. He doesn't have to. We're not going to say he has to move into. There's a special halacha by Ori Miklat that we said you have to go into the move in, to go be with him. But I don't think that. But I think the spirit of the law. I think you're correct that you should have to go ahead and go to teach him, to provide to him. It's interesting that there is an opinion that says that even if he had other students, he still needs to go into the exile, the rabbi. So we have to know more about that. Who's going to pick up the other students? So, but the first opinion says no. It's only when the rabbi has no other students. That's
Rabbi, someone gets to go right now,
yes.
and this is the rabbi go and see a visit with us.
Yeah. Say it again. He has what?
He can go and see a visit with us.
Right.
Can you give him a book right there? Okay, I'm gonna learn this Abishai. Things are common. Can you give him that or not?
So
Are they allowed to have books and stuff?
yes. I've visited jails a number of times. I have a student of mine that grew up in a non-religious home, a very bad, not religious and bad type of situation. Not a proper two-parent situation, and they named him on a crime that happened when then he became religious, great guy, and they named him on a crime that happened when he was not religious. And he had to sit, and he was sitting in jail. I would go visit him. Among other people would go visit him. He's out on parole now. And Yaron came to visit, maybe a couple of times with me. A good friend Yaron from Guadalupe. He'll be back soon. And the story with books is you can't give him anything directly. You could order a book and send it in a certain fashion to the jail. Certain jails don't allow hardcover books because they don't want anything heavy that has the ability to be used as a weapon. I think there are all different rules regarding different materials that are able to be sent and how often you can send something for. Depends on the jail. Certain jails have certain jails you can see them at certain times in the morning, 11 to 1. Some jails you have up to an hour to see him. And there's some jails you can spend the whole day there, like 11 to 5, 11 to 6. Yeah, depends on the particular jail. Every jail has its own rules. What? I mean, I think by law they might have to. I think they definitely you're able to ask and request, and they. I think a lot of depending there's abilities depending on what jail. Some of them are easier and some jails are more harder. But in like one of the jails, there's a vending machine that sells kosher meals. You can buy kosher meals in the vending machine. So when you come visit, you buy him a meal. He can't buy a meal from that vending machine, but you could buy it for him and eat with him together. It's very sad. You see how people with their little kids come to visit their fathers in jail. They have like a playroom for the kids. It's like terrible. It's crazy. So that's a little bit about the person going to jail, person going to exile, to Ori Miklat. And let's see if there's another point over here that we could say about this. The Meiri says there's no life without Torah. See, he's talking about. He said, because now we have another interesting Gemara. The Gemara says, what about if the rabbi killed unintentionally? You bring the yeshiva with him. It's a two-way street. What about if the rabbi killed unintentionally? That's the next halach. You bring the yeshiva with him. Why do you need to bring the yeshiva with him? Because for him also, he doesn't have life. He's missing a life if he doesn't have a yeshiva. He's not teaching Torah. Because he himself is gaining from the learning of the Torah. His life is enriched for teaching Torah. We'll see Monday more about the rabbi going into exile. Have a great day, everybody.